All right, so it's been less than a year and a half since ChatGPT came onto the scene, right? And you can remember when that happened and everything kind of went crazy, right? But what's the current state? Like after there's all this, noise and everything going around, where are we now with AI, would you say?
It's funny because things got going and things were very heated, and then they started calming down once the novelty wore off a little bit. If you look at ChatGPT's usage, it went down, but then there's continuous hype of all these other capabilities that are coming along from an AI perspective. So from a business perspective, what we've been seeing is that there are tons of ideas. Everybody's got an idea. Everybody wants to build a bot. There's all kinds of prompt engineering going on that people are coming up with brilliant ideas on how to uh, draw pictures better and write content faster, that kind of thing. But where we're seeing the issue is that it's not drawn together in like a cohesive picture
Yeah.
for companies. I think that's the where we are right now.
And why is that? I mean, so you could make the case that, hey, isn't it good that innovation's happening and everyone's kind of going off and trying a bunch of things? It's like a thousand flowers bloom. So why is that? Why is that such a big issue?
Yeah, it's funny because the way that this happens in every technology cycle, right? AI is not new. This happened in the web, where in 20 years ago, 25 years ago, everybody went out and built their websites, and companies had 10, 20 different portals that went out to the market. And then there was this massive issue of trying to consolidate that, manage the compliance around that. It happened again maybe 10 years ago with robotics. Everybody went and built their own automation and their own robots. And pretty soon, what ended up happening is there was this massive amount of quote unquote innovation that was out there. Some of it was delivering value, some of it was not. But in general, it was all creating a lot of chaos from a controls and compliance and technology standpoint. And we see that happening with AI, generative AI, especially now, because as people go out and build these bespoke solutions or co-pilots or whatever they're calling them, you really start seeing an issue around how are we managing compliance, how are we managing the technology stack, how are we controlling these things so that we're not putting confidential information out there. There's a great story about how one of the co-pilots uh, opened up the CFO's performance review from the previous quarter and made it accessible to everybody in the chat, to everybody in the company, and that, needless to say, was not a good thing. So there's a whole series of innovations that can happen, but it's got to happen in a structured and managed way. Otherwise, what we're going to find ourselves in, call it 12 months, is a whole bunch of point solutions with a lot of risk and a lot of issues related to that risk. But that said, there's still a ton of very, very valuable solutions that can come out of this.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting because if you look out at the landscape, right, and you can see there's like thousands of these like prompt engineers out there putting all sorts of interesting ideas out there. And a lot of this stuff is really valuable, right? So there are cases where people are striking gold, right, when they're using AI and like all this stuff is out there. So you have to figure that there's all these tactics out there, and eventually some of that has to coalesce into value. But I think what you're saying is that it's not going to happen on its own. If you sort of wait for that and say, hey, we're trying all these tactics, it sounds like you're going to have more of a mess on your hand and versus like signal magically appearing from the noise.
Right? And we've seen this over and over again, right? So this is not the get a whole room full of people and give away free food and free massages with an open floor concept and let them just run wild. That we know that that has not worked in the past for large enterprises. It might work for a small tech firm, but for mid-size or large companies, it's very dangerous to do that, to try and create this innovation with a thousand flowers blooming. What the right way is to create a top-down perspective on where we think we're going to get value out of AI, and then really structure the budget and the governance and the
Mm,
ways of working to go after those point cases. Now, there is a lot of value to creating momentum. Once you have that, let's
mm.
go execute on some of these and create a lot of momentum. But let's do it in the context of what that overall picture is, where that value is going to come from, and make sure that we have the right coalition of people from across the company that are going to actually adopt these things, make them happen, and take advantage of them.
Yeah, what's fascinating about this? There's a lot of parallels to this to if you look at the way VC investing has matured over the years, right? So you've got some investors out there that have heard this idea of asymmetric upside and they just throw a bunch of darts in the air, expecting one of them to come out. And
Right.
like out of every 20 bets, none of them go anywhere, right? Because there's no rhyme or reason to the way the investing is. Where if you look at the best of the best investment firms, they expect maybe one or two out of 10 bets to go 100x, but they do that there's a real rationality to the way that they create the governance or the way they invest and then allow the innovation to take place, right? Because there's a balance here that we're trying to, you can't direct or prescript AI value. You can't say exactly how it's going to come out. There has to be some innovation to it, but there also has to be that structure. So, how do businesses find this balance with AI?
I think the easiest thing that businesses, I mean, AI is good for several things, right? So you can use it to create efficiency. You can use it to create consistency and compliance in the organization so that things are done the same way over and over again. And third, you can use it to fuel growth. Now, given today's environment, growth is not a big element on people's agendas. So where people are really getting a lot of value is in the efficiency play, as well as in the making sure things are done consistently in the same way and driving effectiveness that way. And you can just look at, for example, um, automating repetitive tasks. Right, we did this with robotic process automation, but we have a client who does uh, basically every time a request comes in, an individual has to go through hundreds of pages of documentation to come up with a proposed solution, and it takes them a day to do that. Using using generative AI, that day has been now cut to half an hour.
Yeah.
Literally, the generative AI reads the documentation, answers the question, and the individual simply reviews the output. Another client, when we're talking about underwriting, for example, a process that takes 3 months because of all the documentation that has to come in, the continuous review, then going back to the customer asking for more information, all of that work that gets done is done by elbow grease today.
Mm-hmm.
With the generative AI, a lot of that data consumption and figuring out what's missing and what needs to be added actually is done by the large language model. And then you enable the underwriter to have just meaningful conversations with the customer to get the information that's needed. And in some cases, you need to be careful from a regulatory perspective what you can do. But in some cases, the generative AI, as long as it's been trained properly, can actually go interact with the customer to actually gather that data as well. So now you're talking from a 3 month process to get an underwriting case completed, you're talking about 5 days.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
changes the game completely.
Yeah, and I think there's a few things to unpack here. So first of all, there's sort of the direct benefit of eliminating elbow grease from a process, right? So you take a process that is executed today, that say it takes a day or 2 days or 3 days, and you eliminate it by having generative AI take care of it. So that alone is powerful. But it's like the implications of that are even more powerful, right? Because and what you alluded to is that, well, first of all, what that can do obviously drives direct efficiency, but you can move some of your staff up the food chain in terms of the types of activities that they're doing. So instead of paying someone a lot of money to be doing this elbow grease, you can have them focusing on actual customer value added activities,
That's
right?
right. That's exactly right. And I think the way that I've thought about it in terms of how do you come up with cases, use cases that make a lot of sense. There's definitely fun use cases, right? Graphics, creative, using Midjourney or Dolly to create logos, using Claude or Chat GPT to write content for your marketing campaign, stuff like that. Super fun, super cool stuff. You'll see that posted all over the internet. Where the real value is going to come from is exactly what you just described, which is how do I look at my most valuable processes, things that I haven't been able to automate away because they're just complicated. There's a lot of human engagement, a lot of human
Mm.
judgment involved in that process today. How do I step back and look at how generative AI can actually change the game on that front? Because if you could give that individual, think of it this way, if you could give that individual 10,000 colleagues
Mhm.
that could help them do their job, that's essentially what we're doing,
Yeah.
right? So instead of reading hundreds of pages of content, if they could just give that to 10,000 colleagues that do that work, synthesize the results, and give it back to them, that's what we're talking about with generative AI. And that's the game changing part of generative AI, not just, neater photorealistic imagery, which
Yeah.
in marketing is important, but I think in the day-to-day operation of a company, there are some really pragmatic use cases.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting, right? It's because right on the surface, like, okay, it's an efficiency play, right? Is one way to look at it. But when you go one step deeper into that, it almost becomes a super suit for a lot of your people, right? So you've got your people, they put the super suit on. Suddenly they're immediately more productive. So that, okay, we bank that benefit. But more importantly, they're playing a higher level game now. So
That's
all of
right.
the learning, all of the development that they're doing is not just on how to do this like repetitive process again and again and again. They're now training on a new level and they're learning on a new level because the AI is enabling them to do this. The other thing that happens too is in their mind, it changes their beliefs about what's possible, right? Because you put the super suit on, you're like, well, I can fly, right? So from a metaphorical perspective, well, I can fly in terms of I can talk to my customer, I can present scenarios to them that I wouldn't have even thought of. I would have had my own speed limit because I'd be like, oh, every time I have to do something, oh, that's 2 days of work. So I
That's
better
right.
only I better only pick one option and present it to them. But now if I can present 10 options, it's changing my belief about how I can engage my customer.
That's right. I think that's a really good analogy. Now, the super suit lets you do stuff that you couldn't do before, like fly.
Mhm.
AI still, I think the way to think about AI is it's the ability to multiply yourself on the things that you could have done
Mhm.
yourself if you had the time. So I think the way you describe it is exactly dead on. Is if you had the time, you
Yeah,
would do it, but since you don't have the time or you don't have the capacity to provide this level of service to the customer, you kind of back off of that just because there's just no capacity in the organization to do that. But
exactly.
the the way to get all of this, so as we're talking about these individual use cases, right? You can think about, well, we could go build a little bot to go help with the underwriting piece, right? Or we could build a little chat GPT thing to go help with engaging with the customer. But every single time you build one of those, you're creating tech debt for the organization and you're creating compliance risk for the organization. Is this using the customer data appropriately to have this conversation? Is it making the right offer from a regulatory perspective based on race, gender, whatever the criteria are that you have to follow from a regulatory perspective? So are you doing things that are uh, when you had a human in the loop that those things were controlled, right? So the key thing is going to be to strike this balance of how do you create a centralized place where your AI models are managed.
Mm.
So you have control over those things, what they're producing, what they're doing with hallucinations, how they're being, how regulatory overlay is on top of that. And then the other piece of that is, how do you actually reuse this stuff?
Yeah.
Because let's say that you have a lead scoring mechanism. That lead scoring mechanism might be able to be used across 5 different areas, right? That in a controlled and structured way, using the same data, using the same logic. But if you build it in 5 different places, bringing it back to one place becomes this massive IT headache.
Yeah.
So those are the two things that you need to make sure that happen, is that you're having a controlled environment, and then you're able to use that environment to drive each of these use cases.
Yeah, I think it's kind of fascinating. So you're trying to strike a balance between decentralized innovation around the organization while also managing centralized excellence, for lack of a better word, right? Because on the surface, these things are easy. You just tell the GPT what you want and it does it for you, except for a few of the catastrophic scenarios, right? Like you said, like for instance, like releasing the CEO's performance review, right? Or any number of hallucinations, right? So if we think of the supersuit metaphor again, right? If the supersuit stops working when you're flying and you're 1,000 feet off the ground, that's a problem. And in an organization, if everyone's building these GPTs and every one of them, if there's no structure to it, if we're not managing the hallucinations, if we're not putting the box around it the right way, those are thousands of little ticking time bombs, any one of which could blow up and cause massive amounts of risk or problems for the company.
That's right. That's right. And the way that people would have you think about the approach, right? There's any number of dozens of people out there on the internet where what they're talking about is building these point solutions
Mhm.
and gaining momentum and credibility with these point solutions, which is great. That is one element of a multitude of elements that it takes to actually make a transformation work. What you have to do is first establish the vision of what is this thing going to do. You have to establish that clearly. And we have enough information at this point, a year and a half in, that the vision is getting pretty clear. It just needs to be tuned to what that organization specifically needs. So creating that vision and then building the group of people who are going to drive this forward in the organization
Mm.
from multifunctional roles, as well as understanding what is the value that this is going to bring to the organization. What is our aspiration from the vision in terms of the value that's going to be created? Once you've done that, then yeah, there are 20 things that you can get going right out of the gate, right? But you have the right governance in place, you have the right ways of working and measurement in place, and you have the right way to fund and build that strategy around those individual use cases set up, which is for small businesses may not be important, but to mid-size and especially large corporations, those 3 elements of the governance,
Yeah.
the strategy and funding, and the ways of working and measuring whether you're succeeding, critical to be put
Yeah.
in place,
Yeah.
regardless of what.
But not just, I mean, really exciting too. Because so what's fascinating to me about the AI is that if you properly mitigate the risks and the externalities, the payoff is 100, 1,000x ROI on these things. If you
Yeah,
don't take care of those risks, the damage is a million X, right? So I think
right.
that's why you're seeing a lot of these blowups is because people think it's just a free lunch and I just throw spaghetti at the wall and it's going to stick. And the problem is it's blowing things up. But the reality is, if you create these cross-functional teams of the renegade innovator, for lack of a better word, who wants to get something
Right.
done, but then you've got that responsible, risk compliance person teamed up with them to say, how do we mitigate this, right? And I can even think of like my own personal experience with GitHub Copilot, right? So I've been developing software for decades, right? And when I started using Copilot, it completely changed the way that I worked, but not the way you might think, right? So it's
Right.
not like I just told it what to do and okay, I'm not programming anymore. What was happening is I would give it I would basically say, write this entire thing for me. It would write hundreds of lines of code, and I would go through it and find the 4 catastrophic mistakes in that code. I mean, catastrophic.
Exactly.
And in some cases, catastrophic and latent. So
Right.
I would see something and be like, oh, that's going to blow up later.
Right.
But as an expert, I could immediately scan through that. So still, it was worth a better trade-off for me to tell ChatGPT exactly how to write all of this code than for me to do it myself, but only because I had a process for how to manage the edges.
That's right. I think that's exactly right. The other piece that you alluded to before, which is when you innovate, right? So let's say you've got the vision, you've got that coalition and the structure and governance so that you're doing it in a safe and sound way. Then when you start doing the experiments, the important thing is that you have to be iterative, but you also have to manage and measure the outcomes.
Mm.
This is the part where people miss the whole agile thing, right? Is that, yeah, we're going to put an agile team on it. They're just going to run full force and they're going to do interesting stuff and it's going to be
Yeah,
great.
can I stop you there for a second? Because I've seen hundreds of agile teams. I've never seen any of them where the word agile would be the word that I would describe to explain it. So what happens there? What am I missing and how is it supposed to work?
I think people just cherry pick the word agile and then do whatever they want and call
Yeah.
it agile, right? What agile really is supposed to be, and let's not use that term because it's been so bastardized over the years, but what it's supposed to be is you're supposed to look at all the different things you can do, where the value is going to come from, and prioritize, and then
Mhm.
execute and learn and execute and learn. And once you've put that measurement structure in place, what ends up happening is that if you're getting better by 1% every day,
Mhm.
let's call it best case scenario, you're going to see a curve that looks like this, right? It's going to be compounding. I mean, it's silly to say, but it will compound to where greatness happens up here. If you're not iterating, or if you're only making changes once every month, something like that, then you're actually going to be just flat. It's something like 40x benefit that you get over the course of a year by iterating continuously versus iterating every once in a while.
Yeah.
But that's still assuming that the results are positive from every iteration.
Yeah.
Imagine if you don't know if you're going to have a positive outcome or a negative outcome in your iteration. This is what you described with the throwing spaghetti against the wall. There's an equal and opposite curve that could happen where it tanks your business like this if
Yeah.
you're continuously iterating and you're continuously failing and you don't have the measurement in place. So the goal is to have a bunch of losses and have a bunch of wins, but be able to measure it so that you're continuously ratcheting up. And maybe you're not going to be at 37x or 40x, but maybe you'll end up at 20x
Yeah.
rather than ending up at minus 40x or flat, depending on your process.
Yeah,
So,
and yeah, by the way, when you talk about this really is a discipline that you're describing, right? A discipline of measurement and understanding the results. And when that compounding happens, it's not so like most of your experiments may actually fail as you go through this process, which is totally fine. If
yeah,
you're methodical on measuring it, right, it's the discipline that's going to lead to the result because you continuously push and eventually you're going to quote unquote get lucky. You're going to do an experiment that's going to blow up, right? This is the asymmetric upside, the way that, professional investors do it. And
that's right.
so it sounds like it's the same way, but you have to have that same discipline. Like I even think about when split testing came out and I was trying to do for destinationweddings.com years ago, I ran a split test. We ran 8 split tests in a row that were dead heats, literally exact like statistical dead heats on A and B. And split test number 9 was a 43% uptick. So that to me is the power of you've got to be rigorous with the measurement, but then you've got to be disciplined with continue to experiment and continue to try new things. And I think
That's
AI is
right.
no different. And the good news is there's a lot of raw material out there for experimentation in the wild.
And the other important thing is to recognize that and then recognize that the value is in your people. The intellect is in your people. It's not going to come from some, audit firm that suddenly decided that they were great at artificial intelligence or some, tech consulting firm that decided that they were great at artificial intelligence. The intellectual capability to use AI to transform your business is going to come from your people.
Yeah.
And think about the way that your organization works today, right? At the top of the house, and I've worked in corporate a long time, um, but at the top of the house, you get a number. Here's your revenue number. Here's your earnings number that you got to hit this quarter. That gets doled out to the next level, and that gets doled out to the next level. That gets doled out to the next level until there's somebody who's actually accountable for delivering it. And the only way we know how to run these organizations with people who have 40 years of experience in these management styles is I got to hit those numbers. I can't fail because all that stuff gets tallied up to the top after the end of the quarter. And every quarter, I got to hit those numbers.
Yeah.
What we're talking about is a little bit different mindset. So your management mindset has to change because you're going to open up the aperture to be able to fail,
Mm.
right? Because you don't know what the answer. It's not like putting in SAP or Oracle, for your ERP, where 3 years from now I'm going to have this accounting system in place. This is iterative, continuously changing, new technology evolving. So the mindset of that middle manager who's been doing that job for 40 years, in a way, they get the inputs and they have to have successful initiatives to deliver the outputs back. That has to change.
Yeah.
Now, how do you make that change happen, right? It's very, very hard because even in the way we account for these things, and I'm going to go a little nerdy here for a second, but the way that you implement technology initiatives is it's capital expenditure. So you're going to put in $10 million and then you're going to amortize it over the course of the next 5 years, 10 years, however long you plan to use the software or the asset. In the age where you're talking about things failing, all of a sudden, if that thing fails, you have to write it off in that quarter. If you
Mm.
stop work on that project, you have to write it off in that quarter. So let's say of that $10 million, you spent $2 million, you were planning on amortizing it over the next 10 years. You've already spent the $2 million. If you stop that project, you have to write it off in that quarter. What ends up happening is that people go, whoa, I'm
Yeah.
not taking accountability for that. So these zombie projects keep going. And that's another big danger that we'll see
Wow.
as AI starts getting into other parts of the organization and becoming bigger use cases is the mindset and literally the way that the financial accounting works will have to change.
Wow, there's a lot of crazy things to unpack here. Because first of all, like you could be the reason that someone, the CEO has to get up on an earnings call and basically say, we just totally missed our numbers because we just lost. Like, so that's a lot of weight on someone's shoulders. And now if we take that forward one step and even down to the bottom of the organization, right? When you're putting teams together to innovate on AI, if you don't change the way that you're telling them that you're incentivizing them, right? So when they play, you're placing a bet and they execute that bet and that bet fails, if that sticks to them as failure,
Yep.
then what kind of people, you're not going to attract the right people on these teams going forward. So you have to change the way this becomes an innovation discipline, not a management discipline, right? When you're trying to figure this stuff out, you want to get your A players on there. The A players have to know that I'm being judged on my execution and my innovation, not on which of the 10 bets succeeds. Is that correct? And how do you make that shift?
This is you kind of have to decide what kind of organization you are, right? One customer that I've worked with, they created, by using this iterative approach, they created an 18% improvement in productivity. 18% improvement in something that had been completely flatlined because the market had matured and it was completely flatlined. So the ROI was not getting there. And they put in an iterative process with the right governance, et cetera. The thing that they didn't address was the 18%. The way they got to it was by understanding the customer holistically and delivering what the customer needed when they needed it. The problem is The president of this business unit, who always got all the marketing spend
Mhm.
and therefore always hit their number, now started getting fewer conversions. And the conversions were happening over here because this is what the customer was demanding rather than being hit over the head with this offer. And guess what happened to the leader of the AI project that got the 18% ROI improvement?
He got 18% more ability to go find a new job somewhere else.
Yes, he got 100% more ability to go find a new job
Yeah.
because this person was a very powerful person. And he said, what's going on with my volumes? He didn't hit his number. The company did better overall. He didn't hit his number. And under the 40 years of experience of how you're supposed to run a company, that was a bad thing. So now you look at that and you go, how do you avoid that situation? Number one, you have to have the vision, right? Then you need to build that coalition where
Mm.
everybody who is going to be impacted is actually on board and they manage how that is going to impact their top and bottom line. And then you go execute. This going and executing 1,000 different things without looking at all of that it's fun. Granted, right? It's fun having like, 5-person innovation team running around building GPTs, whatever. But it's not going to be what's going to change the company and create the impact.
And if you want to win, you've got to have your best people doing this. And you know who I'm talking. Everybody who's listening to this immediately knows they can list who their best people. Like they know who these people are, right? Those
Yeah.
people need to be bought in. They need to be, to your point, that second item, which is that the company is deliberately investing in this. We're giving you the charter to go do this, right? And we're investing in the innovation versus a kiddie table innovation where it's like a bunch of people who are just out there doing a bunch of random stuff, hoping to stumble into innovation. And meanwhile, your competitor is going to crush you if that's the approach you take, is kind of what it sounds like.
Yeah. It's a matter of changing the way that you're approaching the problem, right? Not approaching it from a technology or a cool whiz bang thing perspective. But Jeff, the beauty of this is everybody's like, oh, you need to throw everything, our old practices up in the air and not think about how we did things in the past. We got to go the new way, the agile way, change the ways of working, all this stuff. It's not true. The fundamental skills that you need to have to execute this appropriately are already in your organization. Measuring.
Yeah.
Guess
Yeah.
what? Every single person in the organization is already measured. It's just you have to do it a little bit differently going forward. What you described, the incentive structure. How do you
Yeah.
actually incent somebody to do something differently? We know how to do that. There are HR professionals in every organization that their job is to do that.
Yeah.
So, but how do you tweak that a little bit differently, right? So it's not about hiring some big consulting company to come in and do a big $100 million project for you. It's about changing the way that people behave, but with the same skill sets that they have had for 40 years in running the organization.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the secret sauce, is that it's not so freaking secret. Right?
Well,
It's out there.
yeah, and that's what's crazy about this. So, a few months ago, my daughter made me watch all of the Iron Man movies because she was all excited about it. And that's where the super suit metaphor really stuck for
Yep.
me. And what's funny about the watching Iron Man at first, when he first starts playing with that super suit, it's a disaster, right? He's like, it's like shooting off in a million
Right.
different directions. You can't control it. And then eventually when he controls it, there's like a big smile. It's like, hey, I can do this. And there's this feeling like I could always do this. This was natural, right? And so like that was my experience with GitHub Copilot. I mean, I've been programming for 40 years, right? And when I used Copilot and I did it, and suddenly I felt like I was like 9 years old again. I'm like, wow, I can do this 100 times faster than I could before. And I always could. It's like in your
Right.
brain. So a lot of what AI is, it's like unlocking that feeling for people, but doing it responsibly, right?
That's right.
Because and doing it responsibly at the individual levels, realizing first of all, AI is not a tightly defined input-output technology. It has hallucinations. They need to be managed, and they can be managed, but they have to be managed. And second of all, I think the bigger point that you brought up is organizationally, this fundamentally changes the way you have to invest to get returns on AI. Because if you slap down, if you send off these innovation teams and they fail and you slap them down, then you're going to kill and the innovation is going to stop. And whereas
Yeah.
if you figure out the right way to create an investment framework in your organization for how innovation is going to happen with AI, things are going to explode and people are going to want to be part of these AI teams.
Yeah.
That's going to be the place where people are going to want to go. And that's good for the business because at its best, AI can unlock orders of magnitude of value.
That's it. So if you are an executive in any kind of business and you see all this stuff going on in AI and you're just like, what the hell is going on? How do I need to change the business? Everything is going to change. The machines are getting smart. Take a breath, right? Number one, everything you need to manage this change is in your organization.
Mm.
It's the way you've done business for however long you've done business with a little bit of a twist. That's one. Number two is you have time. Everything's not changing and everything's not going to transform itself tomorrow. You have time to take a step back and do things right
Mm.
and manage it the right way. So I think those are the two things. And now what you'll see is everybody who's trying to sell you AI stuff is going to tell you the opposite of that. You don't know how to manage in this new world. We need a bunch of 22-year-olds to come and help you do it. Right. And Jen, whatever it is going to understand this technology better than you. And therefore they'll understand your business better than you. Not true. You understand your business. You've been running it. You do need to change a little bit in terms of how you think about it, but you have the fundamental skills.
Yeah.
The second one is everything's changing overnight. You're going to be out of business tomorrow. 50% of the Fortune 500 or whatever the stat is, 50% of the S&P 500 from 50 years ago is gone, something like that, right? You have time. It's not going to change next year. In 5 years, it will look dramatically different. But the world is not going to change in the next 18 months. So how do you go about making that change happen in your organization without being thrown into this chaos of everything that you read out on the internet and all the stuff that's coming at you? Very, very fundamental. You look at every role in your organization and you say, I have one person doing this. What if they had 1,000 helpers?
Yeah.
What could they do differently? So if you're doing high impact claims in property and casualty, where you have an adjuster who is looking at a case where somebody was injured, how can you improve the quality of that claim? You've got one adjuster running around trying to do it. What if they had 1,000 helpers? How could they serve the claimant much more effectively and have a much better quality outcome for that claim, right? At a much lower cost of actually doing the adjusting. Salespeople. If you had for every salesperson, you had 1,000 people telling them, hey, I looked at all the data and this is the next client you should call on.
Yeah.
Because of these reasons, and you should offer them this. Think about it from that perspective across every single function in your organization, and it'll become hugely clear where you need to make the bets.
Yeah, and I mean it's kind of mind blowing to think about that, right? But also, I think the way you framed it, that it's kind of always in your mind, you already get how this works. It's just that you now have resources that you didn't have available to you before, right? So I think about like a sales guy having all the insights in the world. That's kind of like President Kennedy had the daily brief brought to him, which like every day they said, this is everything we know that's going on in the world, right? Every single day. So that was possible in 1960, right?
That's right.
Now that's possible for
Elbow
every
grease.
single sales opportunity that every sales executive has.
Exactly.
That's the difference.
Exactly
So
right.
it's right. So,
But is
but
it going
what
to
does he do with
change the
that?
way, like, is the bot going to go flying out on a, on a drone and talk to your customer and close the sale? No.
No.
Nothing's going to change from that perspective. The fundamentals of your business are not going to change overnight. So that's the thing that we have to make sure that we think clearly about.
Yeah, and I think also another, I think the metaphor of like imagine you're managing like a major claim, right? And you said that you have 1,000, support staff, virtual support staff to help do that. Now imagine just letting those virtual support staff go talk to the, someone who's been injured or like that could be a catastrophe. I mean,
That would be the catastrophe.
that could be an
Exactly.
absolute catastrophe. But managing it responsibly, which every company already has to have structures in place to manage any new enablement responsibly. So this is no different, I think, is one of the
No
takeaways.
different.
Right.
It's no different. I'll tell you another client. Um, they do a lot of analytical work. It's a insurance company. Do a lot of analytical work to price things, to determine when something bad is likely to happen. Those types of things. A lot of AI ML work that had been going on, but they had been in controlled silos in the organization. And what this has done is it's brought a whole new dimension of now where there were 5, 10 groups that were doing these analytical models and this machine learning and AI. Now every group wants to do it, right? And so the model risk management framework of that company needs to change to be able to account for the volume. But the process that was used to manage the model risk on one thing, that process is going to be able to be extended to the broader need of the company. It's just the volume is going to go up. And so you're
Yeah.
going to need a central team. You need a central platform. You're going to want to reuse things. When you had 5 things, maybe you didn't need to reuse them. But if you got 35 things or 3,500 things, now you might need to reuse some of those components, and being able to manage that effectively will be important. A lot
Yeah.
of these things about what an enterprise needs, very different from some cool prompt that, you know, changes the fonts on your resume for you on LinkedIn or something
Yeah.
like that. But
Yeah.
like there's some great content out there, like really cool stuff that when I go through it, I'm like, oh, this is really interesting, right? What look at what the newest version of DALI or the newest video generation software can do.
Yeah.
All great stuff, but how you change your process inside of an enterprise is a little bit different thought process to go through that.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of parallels to like when the web first came around, and both in terms of how people are reacting to this new technology, and then also how it's likely to play out. So, for instance, like in 1995, I think when Java first came out, people were saying, "Cool, you can do these animated flaming logos with it." Which shout out to animated flaming logos, they're pretty cool,
We
right?
still use them.
Right. We still use it, but that's not really what Java was doing in the enterprise, right? And
Right.
the other thing is there was sort of like two schools of thought in the 90s. There was a school of thought, this will change nothing, right? On one extreme, and the other extreme is this is going to change everything overnight. And they were both wrong, right? To your
Yeah.
to your point about how so the takeaways for AI means number one, you can't stay the same. You have to reinvent yourself with AI in your DNA. That's a must. And number two is, but not overnight, right? That if you look at the web, the real transformation of, the webs first started kicking off in 1994. The real transformation happened after the dot-com crash in like 2002, 2003 was when really some of that stuff started to stick. So when you think about AI, okay, you need to take a sober view towards this, but you also need to understand that if there are capabilities that can change the game by 1 or 2 orders of magnitude or more, you can't pretend like that's not a thing.
That's right.
You need to figure out how do we responsibly bring that into our organization and reinvent ourselves with the emergent capabilities that we now have because of this new technology?
Yeah. And build it on top of the fundamentals that we already have in the organization. We've been around for 100 years. Can we build it on top of those foundational capabilities and those people management skills and those measurement methods and those types of things, right?
Exactly.
How can we do that rather than kind of throwing everything out with the bathwater? If anybody
Exactly.
tells you you need to completely change the way you're doing everything and turn it into all agile and this and that, they haven't done it. They're a consulting firm. They haven't done it,
Yeah.
right? You look at the biggest, baddest consulting firms, you know what they've done to date? They've taken their little knowledge portals where they upload all the customer projects that they've done in the past. They've slapped AI on it to make it a better search tool.
Yeah.
And at best, they might pull some of the pages from those PowerPoint presentations and create a new PowerPoint presentation. That's the extent
Yeah.
of what these people who are experts in transforming your company into an AI company, that's the extent of what they've done for themselves. Right.
So
So
yeah.
take all that with a grain of salt.
Yeah, no, definitely be careful, right? So if the game is reinvention, and on the output side of this reinvention, you're a 2.0 or 3.0 version of the company that you already are, right? Step one is not to take all of your values and throw them all in the trash can and do whatever shiny object is thrown your way, right? Step one is to really reflect, to do this, do this combination of innovations you can experiment to kind of figure out how this stuff works, but then also to combine that with the essence of what you are as a company and the value and the brand and what relationship you have with your customers, to ask yourself, how can we further our values because of these technologies? Not how can we suddenly become something completely different than we were yesterday.
Right. That's exactly right.
Right.
And that is a really nice synthesis because if you think about the most insidious thing that's going to happen, no one's ever going to be able to convince you. They're going to try. They're not going to be able to convince you to throw everything out,
Mhm.
right? What they will be able to convince you to do, and these could be internal people or external people, is build these little use cases.
Mhm.
Like, hey, how about we help your salespeople do a better job? How about we help your call center be more effective? And you'll do these little use cases that are supposed to be experiments, but they will become hardened parts of your operations over time.
Yeah.
And if those are not executed, if those are executed in a vacuum and they're not executed with the right governance and controls, you're creating opportunity for chaos in terms of risk and compliance.
Yeah.
If those are executed as quick wins underneath the vision and the coalition that we're talking about, then you're proving that portions of the vision can work and you're managing it with the right resources, with the right buy-in, and you're not going down that 18% improvement individual's path who
Yeah.
missed somebody on their
Yeah.
coalition, right?
Yeah. So I think there's a really interesting way to frame this, right? And so we talked before about compounding. Compounding is going to happen whether you like it or not when it comes to AI, like anything else, right?
Yep.
Number one, compounding can go in either direction. It can go up and reinvent your company in a way that's going to be much better than before, or it can insidiously go down and slowly destroy your company from when you didn't even see it coming. That's how
Yep.
compounding can work. What's interesting about transformational technologies like AI is they compress that compounding curve and they make it happen in the matter of months or years and not decades. So you've got to get it right and you've got to be deliberate about it. Now, I think the most interesting parallel that I can think of is years ago, I was in a class at Sloan and they were talking about information technology, right? And they said, well, how has it turned out? What's the ROI of it? IT was the hot thing back then, right? So what's the business case for it? And what they found is, over looking across the Fortune 500, I think they looked at 50 Fortune 500 companies, average ROI of 0%. plus or minus
Zero
100%.
point
Yeah, it
zero
was literally
zero.
an average ROI on investments in technology. And companies already spent tons of money on technology at this point. This was the early 90s.
Yeah,
Average ROI of 0%, but plus or minus like 100% or 200. It was some crazy deviation, which is
yeah,
effectively describing this compounded curve. And what they found is when companies had access to all of these new IT resources at their disposal, the companies that were deliberate and saw the opportunity and were very methodical had massive outsized returns from it. And the ones that just went in like a chicken with their head cut off and just started executing IT everywhere automated their disaster. They basically they're on a path to disaster and they got there much quicker because of the IT.
yeah.
AI is this times 10.
It really is. And you maybe don't even have to go back that far. Look at digital,
Mm,
right? Digital transformation was a massive initiative. Billions, maybe trillions of dollars have been poured into digital transformation because everybody was worried about what happened to Target or Kohl's by Amazon is going to happen to my industry,
mm.
right? Um, it didn't work out that well. Literally, if you look at the numbers, if you look at the statistics, 80% of digital transformation initiatives failed, did not achieve the goals that they had originally set out to do. Why? Because they didn't think about the vision, pushing it down, building that coalition, and then driving those three elements we talked about. What's that governance piece? What is the strategy and funding? How do you prioritize and fund these things and set them up for failure and success? And then lastly, how do you change the ways of working, but measure the outcomes, right? No, don't just throw a bunch of agile teams at it. Measure the outcomes. The ones that did that succeeded
Yeah.
exactly like you said, right? 100% or negative 100%. The ones that didn't spent, I know of companies who have spent a ridiculous amount of money. I won't get into the numbers, but hundreds of millions of dollars,
Mm.
and they have not successfully delivered iota of earnings improvement from that.
Wow. And
Can you
and
imagine that? And others have spent $80 million and delivered, one company delivered an 11% improvement in earnings per share. Spent
yeah.
$80 million a year.
And I think of this organizationally, right? Imagine the cynicism that seeps into a company that just spent hundreds of millions of dollars and didn't make any progress. That's disastrous from a morale perspective. And versus imagine the company that just spent tens of millions of dollars and got a massive return off of that. The momentum that that creates in the organization that's possible. I mean,
That's
it's
right.
just amazing to think about.
That's right. And you don't even think about in that hundreds of millions of dollars scenario, that money came from somewhere. So all the other business units were starved for digital investment over the years that these guys spent their hundreds of millions of dollars in this one business unit. So all the other business units actually fell behind, right?
Yeah.
What they would normally have spent in technology or digital.
Yeah.
So that triples the cynicism. Is not only were we not able to pull this off, not only did we spend all this money, but I didn't get to invest what I needed to invest to keep my business competitive.
So it's so funny because every time a new technology comes up, you see the thing on the surface and it is what it is. But the second and third order dynamics and the organizational dynamics and all the offshoots, there's so much more to managing something like AI and how it's going to reinvent your company than just how do we deal with the AI itself.
Right. That's the key.
Right.
And where people are focused is the AI itself. They're
Yeah.
focused on prompts and cool videos and, you know, the how many tokens should be used to do this or that. It's it's not it's not what's going to drive the business value. It's going to drive a lot of entertainment value for
Yeah.
sure, right? Just like ChatGPT has driven a lot of entertainment value.
Yeah.
But writing contracts more effectively. These are the boring things, right? This is the
Mhm.
boring stuff that we do day in and day out. But the boring stuff is being better at writing contracts, taking your sales team and the people who are in that second tier of performance and bringing them up to the potential that the first tier of salespeople are.
Yeah.
Right? How do you do that using AI? Taking the way that people handle P&C claims. How do you get your average adjuster performing at the level of your best, or maybe not your best, but pretty darn close? How do you get them performing at that level? That level of operational excellence, I think, is where, at least in the short term, given where we are in the environment today with the economy, that's where the value is going to come
Yeah.
from. And once interest rates and the election and all that are behind us, I think we're going to be in a little bit different place where growth is going to become a priority again,
Yeah.
across the board. And it'll be a whole new set of use cases that come to bear. But I think in the short run, there's a massive amount of value to be captured by doing it right at this stage in these operational areas where you can just clearly go in and see, wow, what if we could just enable this with 1,000 other people? What would that look like?
Yeah.
Right. And there you'll create hundreds of millions of dollars of value for your company.
So I think it's really interesting. So it's sort of like if we make a reference back to Bubba Gump Shrimp, right? So the growth strategy there was to get through the storm, right? And that's part of
That's right.
this.
Yeah.
But I think what's interesting is we're talking about elevating the discussion, right? So the discussion around AI is around like, here's 1,000 prompts to do 1,000 different things. Like it's kind of like when the web first came out, you could go to the bookstore and there were these printouts of like 1,000
Right.
websites and be like, okay, what do I do with that, right?
Right.
So it's sort of like scattershot tactical. And the next level up is to say, okay, well, now it needs to become focused strategic. And within an organization, the way to think about this, or the parallel to, say, an investing firm would be that's like the startup within the organization. Like, what is this project? What is this initiative's goal strategically to experiment with AI and to figure something out? And then the next level beyond that is what's the portfolio strategy for the organization? How do we manage all of these bets on AI to try and move the organization forward? And then even beyond that, how does all of this create a new emergent reinvention of the organization? Once we get good at all these different things, and this is like you said, you use the word boring. It's pretty funny, but it's not, it's like blocking and tackling, right? How
It
do we
is.
get really, we have to get good at the tactics, got to be good at that stuff, get good at the strategy with each initiative, figure out how to measure and pull things into the organization and then figure out how to ultimately reinvent the company around this.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, the what I'm hearing from the consulting firms is scares me a bit, just because they see this as another inflection point for a new set of practices and generating a new set of revenue for themselves. They are not set up to help you succeed, right? Consulting companies, there's a billing rate, and they want to bill you at that billing rate for as many units on that billing rate as possible for as long as possible. Now, there are some exceptions that some consulting firms are more driven on impact, but by and large, that's what they do. So they see this as an opportunity to help you drive 100 different use cases and build 100 different platforms and attack 100 different things in your operations. They're not going to help you prioritize the three things that are going to drive the most impact for your organization, because that's not how they get paid. The other way that they don't get paid is helping you transform over time,
Mm-hmm.
helping your organization get the right skills and capabilities and tools over time. They get paid on executing,
Yeah.
doing their projects, moving on to the next project, right? If you build capability, or if you take 6 months to build your internal capabilities, that's 6 months of revenue that they don't realize. And ultimately, if you build the capability, then they don't get the revenue for
Yeah.
doing that work for you. Again, if you're implementing Salesforce, you know what the end state is going to look like. You need a bunch of people to show up. The school bus pulls back,
And by the way,
pulls up in front of you.
part of the end state is not that you're going to become a Salesforce implementation company, because that's not what you do. So that's totally
That's
okay.
right. That's right. That's
That's totally
exactly
okay.
right. So they'll drop in 100 people, they'll put in Salesforce, they'll write requirements. And a lot of them are doing a really nice job of using AI to make themselves more efficient.
Mhm.
So when you're negotiating these deals with them, you should make sure that you're getting advantage of the fact that they've become more efficient using AI. But that start and end point are clearly defined.
Yeah.
And that's what they're good at executing to. This is different. This is taking your capabilities that you have today and twisting them just a little bit to be able to meet the technology where it is. And then as it evolves, be able to meet the technology where it is as it evolves. And it's not difficult or complicated. You don't need to change your dress code and tear down the walls in your office building. Those are not the things that drive the value here. It's
Yeah.
strategic thinking, building the vision, and then laying down the right governance, the right ways of working, and the right strategy and funding mechanism to prioritize what you're working on.
But the deliverable, I mean, I think this is a great comparison, right? Because when you want Salesforce, the deliverable is the Salesforce
It's
is implemented
Salesforce.
in your company. Right. So you shouldn't go figure out how to do that. You should go find best of breed provider to be able to do that. But what we're talking about here is reinventing yourself with AI in the DNA. That's a transformation exercise and
Yeah,
everything we've been talking about. So you need to figure out how do you go through that transformation? Not how you can't outsource the transformation.
that's right. That's what you can't do is you cannot just give it to somebody to go execute on your behalf.
Yep.
That's the key. And who are you giving it to, right? You've got a few limited choices. You got the old school traditional kind of, you know, jacket and tie C-suite consulting firms. You've got these tech implementers, hundreds of thousands of people in their organizations, and they bang out technology. And then you've got the audit firms.
Mhm.
Like literally, that's your choice of who you're going to outsource this to. So, do you want to, have any of them actually achieved what you need to achieve? Is transforming your underwriting and onboarding processes to give a better experience to your
Yeah.
customer, or changing the way you write legal contracts by enabling junior people to do what senior people can do today. They've never they don't know how to do that stuff
Yeah.
in your industry, right? They've seen it done, but they don't know how to do that stuff. They've never done it before. It's just all theory. They're learning alongside you.
No, I think that's great. There's nobody with 10 years experience transforming organizations with generative AI.
Exactly. So it may as well be you that builds the
Yeah.
skill set rather than building it at some audit firm.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. So,
Cool.
all right.
Well, this has been fun.
Yeah, no, this is it's funny how like something that seems small, like a new technology, turns out to be like when you peel the onion goes down, the onion turns into a rabbit hole when you start peeling it. Um, and that's why I think it's important for people to start having these discussions, because there hasn't been a lot of talk about the strategic integration of AI into the fabric of an organization to reinvent it.
That's right.
So,
That's right. And it's no different than how you've done any smaller changes in the past. That's the one thing that I keep talking to my clients about is the world hasn't just completely changed because generative AI was dropped. The way of doing work will change, but the way that you run a company will not change. And people always throw out Uber. What about Uber? What about
mm,
Amazon? It's like, great. Those were into, like, think about the taxi cab industry. If you are a global consumer products company, you're not a taxi cab company, right?
Yeah.
You're not a fragmented industry with massive synergies from consolidating and making the customer experience better. If you are a fragmented industry, if you're a janitorial services company that you do 5 different buildings in your metropolitan area and there are thousands of companies like you, yeah, technology is going to change that model,
Yeah.
and financing is going to change that model because there's a lot of synergies and value to be captured there. There's, Harvard Business School, uh, they have these competitions, the business plan competitions. Every year, it's about how we're going to build this private equity firm to roll up janitorial services companies, right? And 50 other companies like that. So Uber is an example of that. Amazon is an example of they haven't made any money yet, right? Like Amazon is an example of where the financing model of that industry has changed. And it's not about groceries have changed.
Yeah.
It's about how you can use the equity markets and you can use the technology platform and you can use advertising to fund a loss leader, which is your grocery business.
Yeah. Great. Well, Raj, thanks for talking to me.
Yeah, it's been fun.
All right, cool.